Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. Relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan have begun to get from bad to worse, with Pakistan's forces allegedly opening fire not just on Afghan army troops but Afghan refugees on a crossing point near the Khyber Pass at Torkham on the Pak-Afghan border. Pakistan wants Afghanistan to accept the Durand line as the boundary between the two countries, but the Afghans have always been reluctant to accept that.
A recently revealed set of documents by the former Afghan chief of intelligence has exposed Pakistan's decades-old sinister design of training and inducting the Taliban into Afghanistan to carry out acts of terror, including those against Indian missions. But relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan had begun to improve in the last 1 year, when the new Afghan president Ashraf Ghani made efforts to mend fences with Pakistan. Ghani had also agreed to take action against the Taliban groups that Pakistan had blamed for the massacre of their school children on the 16th of December 2014. The Afghan-Pak border is 1,500 miles long as demarcated by the British, with Iran in the south and extending to the bottom of Central Asia, known as the Durand Line, effectively a porous border with a few prominent crossing points like Chaman in Baluchistan and Torkham near Peshawar. Pakistan therefore decided to create a border checkpoint at Torkham to stall the movement of Afghans into Peshawar. This led to huge resistance by the Afghan army, which Pakistan blames for opening fire on Pakistani troops, leading in turn to massive military retaliation by the Pakistan army with artillery, tanks and mortars. Pakistan deeply resents India's growing footprint in Afghanistan, with Prime Minister Modi having earlier inaugurated the Afghan Parliament building, more recently a dam in Herat, and multiple schools, hospitals and road networks. The hostility between Pakistan and Afghanistan has become worse ever since the Indian government presented 3 Mi-25 attack helicopters to the Afghan forces, which makes it easy for them to target Pakistan-sponsored Taliban insurgents.
And to look at an issue which has enormous implications for South Asia and for India, which is increasingly a big player in Afghanistan, we have two experts who know both Pakistan and Afghanistan rather well. We have with us Mr. Jayant Prasad, who was formerly India's ambassador to Afghanistan and is currently the director of the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. And we have Mr. G Parthasarathy, well-known commentator and former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan. Mr. Parthasarathy, sir, I'd like to begin with you. Yeah. The problem, as I see it, is essentially about Pakistan wanting to impose its version of the boundary on the Afghans, primarily the Durand Line. But as we all know, the Durand Line was another line drawn by the British on the map, and it has families and populations that have been separated for decades. And certainly the Pashtun population doesn't accept the Durand Line, nor does Kabul.
Well, let us look at the broader issue. The broader issue is that there are about 3 million, I suppose, refugees who came in from the 80s from Afghanistan to Pakistan. Most of them, or 2/3 of them, living in the border, and the rest spread out across Pakistan. And in addition, Pakistan, by its military operations in the northwest frontier tribal areas bordering Afghanistan, has forced another 1.8 million Pashtuns to flee. So in effect, the Pashtuns are dispersed. The other thing we have to bear in mind, Maroof, is that no Pashtun, whether on the other side or in Afghanistan or Pakistan to start with, accepted the border as they got it in independence. That was imposed by the British in 1893, the Durand Line. Pashtuns regard the entire territory of the northwest frontier province, a part of Baluchistan, extending up to Attock on the banks of the Indus, as a part of a Pashtun homeland.
As a recent statement by...
No, and recently Mahmud Khan Achakzai, who's a very respected Pakistan politician on, they say, on this issue being very similar to Badshah Khan, when Pakistan threatened to send back the Afghan refugees, this person who's been a Pakistan member of parliament issued a statement from Afghanistan saying that how can you throw out somebody from our own homeland, that our traditional border has been up to the river Indus and in Balochistan. This is all the homeland of Pashtuns. And I say, if there's no question of anybody returning from this homeland of theirs to another part of it.
Right.
More importantly, those Pashtuns who have been settled outside this province, it can't be sent out of Pakistan. If they come back in this direction, we will accommodate them in this area.
Interesting. Mr. Jayant Prasad, sir, you obviously know Afghanistan well and also know Pakistan well, and now in your role, you're looking at the entire region very closely. It is said that in the last 12 months, Pakistan-Afghanistan relations have gone from a high to a low.
Absolutely.
In terms of President Ashraf Ghani trying to do the other thing that his predecessor wasn't doing, that is kowtowing to the Pakistanis in some way. He's made friendly gestures towards Pakistan, but Pakistan's agenda, as we've seen always, is very self-centered. And it continues to make promises on which it doesn't deliver. And Ashraf Ghani has obviously been put off.
Right.
Would you like to elaborate?
Well, Ashraf Ghani started exactly as you said he started. And the grand gesture he made to Pakistan, the most significant one was exchanging dossier of all the information that the Afghan intelligence had on people who were creating trouble for Pakistan within Pakistan. And he did so in expectation of three things. You know, when he first went to Islamabad, he landed there, and the reception committee constituted by Sattar was taken aback, because from there he drove straight to GHQ Rawalpindi. He went there, he later explained, because he knew that the source of the problems that he had lay with the dual use agency, which was at the same time fighting terrorism and supporting terrorism. So he made three requests to Rahil Sharif. None of the three materialized. One was, please don't let the 2015 summer campaign begin. Please take action against the Haqqani network, and please deliver the Afghans who are part of the Quetta Shura for the peace talks. These peace talks were held last year in Murree on the 7th of July, and a week later it came out that Mullah Omar, who was supposed to be backing the peace talks, had been dead already for a period of 27 months. So there has been a huge denouement so far as President Ashraf Ghani is concerned. And now if you see his statement at the Warsaw summit of NATO, it was very hard-hitting. The Pakistanis have reacted in a very hostile way to it. He said that Pakistan, contrary to promises, is still making the distinction between good and bad Taliban. And he said that you cannot solve insurgency or terrorism without support and sustenance and sanctuary coming from the neighborhood. And he appealed to all neighbors of Afghanistan to support the sovereignty of Afghanistan, hinting thereby that Pakistan actually has been subverting that sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Interesting, sir. I mean, and that's the way Pakistan operates. But quickly, sir, the 1,500-mile-long Durand line is a border which is unregulated. It's certainly not acceptable to the Afghans. Pakistan wants to push that. But even in the 1990s, the Pakistan-installed Taliban regime in Afghanistan didn't recognize the Durand line. So what is really the way forward now? Because collectively, whether it's Torkham or Chaman, these are a handful of crossing points where Pakistan wants to have a symbolic presence. But a lot of the other border doesn't have any fencing or anything. So why do people need to come through a gate? They can walk through the open area.
No. The very purpose of putting that gate, that's the route which most people crossing the border take, it's very convenient, was seen by the Pashtuns as an effort to say that the border lies on that, in that area, which no Afghan will accept. And therefore, the Afghans retaliated, and it turned out into an armed fight in which there were casualties on both sides. But the larger issue is, as Ambassador Jayant Prasad said, Pakistan's support for the Taliban, and even they have not recognized the Durand Line. The reason is, it is in Pakistan's interest to have a destabilized, weak Afghanistan ruled by its proteges, so that they don't again make the claim of the border. The border, no, all Pashtuns, you remember Khan Afzal Ghaffar Khan, he is not buried in Peshawar. After he died, his body was taken across the Durand Line and buried in Jalalabad.
Interesting.
That was a symbol that as a
that-
Pashtun, I do not recognize this border.
Yeah,
Now,
and they're on
that
both
sort
sides
of
of-
symbolism is coming because of Pakistani actions, because it attacked its own Pashtuns of the Tehreek-e-Taliban, whom it had created and supported, and they are on the other side of the border, and they don't recognize, and even they don't recognize it.
Right. Mr. Prasad, sir, a quick question. And Pakistan has been stirring up trouble in Afghanistan for decades. And it is not just limited to border incursions, not just limited to support of Taliban or other insurgent groups. And the Afghans obviously realize that, and they know that this is one of the pressure tactics that Pakistan uses. What other pressure tactics do Pakistan use on Afghanistan?
You know, the pressure tactic which is the most effective, unfortunately till now, has been to persuade some of the bigger benefactors of Afghanistan to scale down the level of assistance they are providing to build up the Afghan National Army, which has been reduced to a constabulary with personal infantry weapons. They have no enablers, no protected surface mobility, no medical evacuation, no intelligence, and some of that is now beginning to be remedied. And there is a little bit of a shift which is very troubling for Pakistan, because you know, the drones that the United States has deployed over there aggressively since 2009 had always got the Taliban leaders in Pakistan under surveillance and within striking distance, and but they have never struck before. But the recent killing of Mullah Mansoor just outside Quetta, where the Quetta Shura is supposed to be based, that shows a significant departure. The other departure is that President Obama, in his last meeting with President Hamid Karzai in Washington DC over 2 years ago, had declared that they don't consider Taliban to be a US target and that Afghanistan would have to deal with the Taliban. That has just been reversed a week ago, and now the new instructions for the US commander, who has a little more latitude and a little more force with him, instead of 1,000 special operation forces of the US, now there are 3,000 operating in combat roles, and the US Air Force is there. They have instructions to go after the Taliban. So they are beginning to feel the pressure.
Tide is turning against Pakistan, and we'll be back after a break to look at not just the pressures that will be further built up on Pakistan, but the strategic implications of what is happening there, and what and how it can impact on India's policy in Afghanistan. But that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two distinguished experts and guests with us. Mr. Parthasarathy, sir, Ambassador Prasad mentioned about clearly US policy turning and shifting away from its earlier kind of Nelsonian approach towards the Pakistan and Pakistan's activities. But it's also becoming, I think, evident to the Pakistanis that they cannot juice the US anymore, particularly after the F-16 deal was put on a hold, and the fact that the US has given India the nod to get on with the Chabahar port arrangement with Iran. Pakistan, as you know and you've often commented, has also upset the Iranians to no end. So clearly Pakistan is getting boxed more and more into problems of its own making. How do you see the whole story unfolding?
There is an interesting point. I have never seen Pakistan so isolated. The Saudis are furious with them. The recent killings at Jeddah and Medina, and in that Holy Prophet's tomb, Pakistanis were involved, and the Saudis named Pakistanis. So with the UAE, it's as bad. Most importantly, recently there have been reports directly accusing Iran and Afghanistan of having intelligence collaboration against Pakistan. And 4 Iranian soldiers were killed by insurgents from Pakistan, and Iran has protested about it. So I think Pakistan now, and that is the reason why when Maliha Lodi spoke about human rights violations in India, nobody backed them. Pakistan even couldn't get elected to the UN Human Rights Commission, which is ridiculous. So they are totally isolated, and diplomatically, in a way, I am glad they are taking the matter to the UN. Nobody is listening to them. So they stand exposed before the world, but we can't afford to rest, Maroof. I think since they have boxed themselves into a corner, I am not one of those who is given to turning the other cheek. I wouldn't let them off that corner. As Ambassador Jayant Prasad said, Char Bahar is important. The Iranian connection has gone well. The Chinese may do a lot for them against India, but even they can't be too pleased with what is happening by the way of their isolation. The diplomatic pressure must continue. So that, and I think we're doing a good job of it at the present moment.
Right. Ambassador Prasad, sir, Afghanistan's patience with Pakistan has clearly run out.
Right.
They have seen that Pakistan's whole obsession with the strategic depth in Afghanistan and wanting to control that region, wanting to send in all sorts of troublemaking elements there. And as Ambassador Prasad has brought out, that pushback refugees, my figures are 1.6 million refugees formally, 1.5 million refugees informally, and if you count the people who've been bombed out of Waziristan, the local population, then you're looking at a figure in close to 5 million. Obviously, all 5 million are not going to go into Afghanistan, but for a country with a population of about 28 million, even 2 million extra would be a 10% increase, and they are fighting for resources. So where do you see Afghanistan now using all the goodwill that is there for Afghanistan in the world and putting Pakistan on additional pressure?
They are going to continue to be under greater and greater pressure.
They means Pakistan.
The Pakistanis, because you mentioned the case of the refugees. You mentioned the case of the bad blood that exists today between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It actually needn't be so, because the two peoples are very close. There is a bonding factor. There are Pashtuns on both sides of the borders. Actually, 2/3 of the Pashtuns live in Pakistan and only 1/3 live in Afghanistan. And many Pakistani and Afghan leaders have said that the two countries are like conjoined twins. Now, when it was very interesting to hear Ambassador Parthasarathy on the Durand line. I recall that when Mullah Omar was the ruler in Afghanistan during the Taliban days in Kandahar, there were emissaries sent from Pakistan to get him, who had been supported by Pakistan so much, to begin to acknowledge the Durand line. And he scolded the emissaries and sent them off, because he said, shame on you to come and talk to a brother about a border. There are no borders between brothers. And just to recall, in 1948, when Pakistan, soon after its creation, went to the UN, as a successor state, we became members of the UN, they had to apply. There was one country in the world that opposed that application, that was Afghanistan. And in 1949, there was a Loya Jirga, which is an assembly of elders, which is the basis on which the Afghan constitution was created. The 1949 Loya Jirga categorically repudiated the Durand line. And in 1961, the border was shut down between the two countries because of clashes. And now, and twice before, diplomatic relations have been affected between the two sides. The Pakistani mission in Kabul has been totally burnt down in the past by an Afghan angry crowd over this issue. So there are huge problems between the two.
Interesting. I mean, very interesting facts you've brought out. Ambassador Parthasarathy, sir, Pakistan has resorted to artillery, mortar and tank firing when they were stopped by the Afghans in building the gate at Torkham. Pakistan was trying to insist on formalizing the border, which the Afghans and Pashtuns don't agree to. When India was making the fencing not clearly on what we see constitutionally our border, which goes to the border of POK with the rest of Pakistan, but even on the LOC, Pakistan did a song and dance about it and made all the objections and every effort to stop us from building the fence, despite the fact that in Suchetgarh, General Bhagat and General Hamid Khan had signed an agreement on a dotted map with all the coordinates agreeing on the layout of the LOC. So here again, double standards on the part of Pakistan, that on one thing, when it comes to Kashmir, it's acceptable to them. On its border with Afghanistan, it says don't interfere, particularly because they are obsessed with India's footprint that is increasing in Afghanistan, and they have nothing good to offer the people of Afghanistan except trouble.
They fear nothing more than India, they fear Pashtun nationalism. Don't forget 20% of the Pakistan military is Pashtun. I just want to add one point, Maroof. For too long, we have tolerated this Pakistan fiddling around with our maps. They even show Hyderabad and Junagadh as being disputed in their maps. I think the time has come when Indian maps start showing the rival claims on our maps of the Kabul border extending up to the Indus River at Attock and including parts of Balochistan and of course the whole of the northwest frontier province. And that is a disputed area between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I don't know why, all in our search for goodwill when they do all this, why we don't repay back their own coin. If Indian maps across the world start showing that entire area as disputed, it will come to the world's attention, not just Jammu and Kashmir and all the nonsense they talk about it. But it is time we restored the status of a dispute to the Durand Line. It was set up by the British to have a defensible border. It divided people, and the Afghans never accepted it. I think apart from anything else we do, I believe that we need to do this.
That's all we have time for. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye. Thank you.